Hello there. Tonight I'm going to take you back to a time when sandy dunes stretched like golden oceans, when towering mountains guarded ancient secrets, and when caravans of traders moved slowly, steadily, across the land like the faint pulse of a distant heartbeat. Imagine a single thread of silk, glistening in the morning sun. That thread would stretch across thousands of miles, weaving through mighty empires, wild frontiers, and forgotten cities. It would carry not only precious goods, but stories, ideas, dreams, and destinies. This is the story of the Silk Road, a road that was never just a road, but a living, breathing network of life itself, a path carved not in stone, but in memory. In this journey through time, we will follow that thread, from its earliest origins to its lingering echoes in our modern world. If you enjoyed tonight's story, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like, subscribe, or maybe comment on where you are listening from. So if you are getting ready to settle down for the night, looking for a distraction from work or study, or maybe just looking to relax for a while, you found the right place. Quiet the noise of the modern world. Sit back, relax, and we will begin our journey. Our tale begins not with a grand map or a ruler's decree, but with a simple desire, connection, to reach beyond the horizon, to meet strangers and become changed by the meeting. Let us go now, softly, quietly, into the ancient past. Long ago, more than 2 millennia before our present time, the world looked vastly different. Great empires rose and fell like the tides, separated by towering mountain ranges, vast deserts, and treacherous seas. In the far east, nestled among fertile river valleys and protected by formidable natural barriers, the Han Dynasty emerged as a beacon of stability and prosperity in ancient China. Their realm was vast and thriving, rich in culture and innovation, and it was under their leadership that the threads of the Silk Road began to take shape. At the heart of the Han Empire was the bustling capital city of Chang'an, a vibrant urban center teeming with merchants, artisans, scholars, and bureaucrats. Here, in the stalls of the crowded markets, one could find an item so delicate, so desirable, that it would change the course of history: silk. Smooth, shimmering, and almost impossibly fine, silk became a treasure beyond compare. Its origin was carefully guarded, known only to the Chinese, who had mastered the delicate art of sericulture, raising silkworms on mulberry leaves, harvesting their cocoons, and spinning the threads into luxurious fabric. This soft, glistening material would soon become the currency of diplomacy, the hallmark of nobility, and the most sought-after commodity in the known world. But how would the wonders of the East find their way to distant lands? The answer came not from a merchant, but from an explorer. A young envoy named Zhang Qian was chosen by Emperor Wu of Han in the 2nd century BCE to journey westward. His mission: to forge alliances with distant peoples against the Xiongnu, a powerful nomadic confederation threatening China's borders. Zhang Qian's journey, however, was anything but straightforward, and somewhat delayed. Captured and imprisoned by the Xiongnu for over a decade, he eventually escaped and pressed onward, determined to fulfill his emperor's command. Over the course of 13 long years, Zhang Qian traveled through strange and wondrous lands. He ventured into Central Asia, encountering the powerful Dayuan people in Fergana, admired their majestic horses, and learned of regions further west where silk had already reached, though no one knew its origins. When he returned to China, Zhang Qian brought with him not just information, but a vision. The world beyond China was hungry for connection, for trade, but most importantly, for silk. His report sparked something profound within the Han court, a realization that China could stretch its influence beyond its traditional boundaries, not through war, but through exchange. Soon, trade routes began to form. These were not paved highways, but a rough web of trails and caravan paths etched into the landscape by centuries of footsteps. Through the Taklamakan Desert, over the treacherous Pamir Mountains, across the Iranian plateau and into the Levant, merchants began to journey, forging links between the East and the West. Caravans of camels carried bolts of silk, baskets of tea, and ceramics delicately painted with dragons and lotus flowers. In return came horses, gold, jade, spices, precious stones, glassware, and exotic fruits. The Silk Road was not a single road, but a series of interconnected arteries, pulsing with life and possibility. As these trade routes expanded, cities began to flourish along their edges. Oasis towns like Dunhuang, Kashgar, and Samarkand grew into cosmopolitan hubs where languages blended and cultures met. Caravanserais, inns built for travelers, sprang up along the paths, offering shelter, food, and protection. These outposts were more than mere rest stops. They became places of exchange not only for goods, but for stories, customs, and ideas. A Greek merchant might share a fire with a Persian priest and a Chinese scholar. In the flickering glow of their campfire, worlds intertwined, stories were told, and deals were made. And through it all, silk remained the symbolic lifeblood of this great exchange. In Rome, senators wore togas made of silk imported from the East, awed by its smoothness and sheen. In India and Persia, the fabric adorned kings and temples, yet none of these distant peoples could decipher the secret of its creation. To them, silk was somehow created through alchemy, it seemed, from the heavens. The Silk Road was never merely about wealth, it was about contact. Every interaction, a handshake, a meal, a bargain struck, became a thread in a larger tapestry of human connection. It was along these paths that ideas would later travel. Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam would all move across the Silk Road, changing as they went. But in these early years, it was the spirit of adventure, the thrill of discovery, and the lure of the unknown that carried traders forward. This was the birth of the Silk Road, not a beginning marked by fanfare or proclamation, but one formed quietly, steadily, by countless small steps and brave choices. A whisper in the wind, a shimmer on the fabric. The road had begun. Let us now follow that road as it branches into new lands and greater complexity. The Silk Road is often spoken of as if it were a single, unbroken path stretching across continents, one long ribbon connecting China to the Mediterranean. But in truth, it was never a single road. It was a shifting, evolving, multi-dimensional web of routes that adapted to the movements of people, the rise and fall of empires, the harshness of the seasons, and the subtle needs of survival and exchange. The name Silk Road itself is modern, coined in the 19th century by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen. Ancient travelers would have known it differently, not as a concept, but as an experience. Traders didn't speak of the Silk Road. They spoke of crossing the Gansu Corridor, climbing the Pamir Mountains, or sailing across the Persian Gulf. They moved not in grand caravans from end to end, but in segments, along interconnected routes, through a network that ebbed and flowed with the ages. From Xi'an in the east, routes split and rejoined like rivers. The northern route snaked through the Gobi Desert and skirted the Great Wall's western reaches, heading toward Central Asia. The southern path dipped toward the edge of the Tibetan plateau. threading through the precarious mountain passes and cutting across the great Taklamakan Desert. Its name meaning, you go in, but you don't come out. Between these main arteries, countless smaller routes fanned out, leading to India, Southeast Asia, and even looping down to maritime trade routes that hugged the Indian Ocean. The sheer vastness of the network is staggering. Some routes connected as far north as Mongolia and the Eurasian steppe, linking to the nomadic trade networks of the Scythians and later the Mongols. Others extended south into the Indian subcontinent, giving rise to new cultural and economic exchanges. Cities like Bactria, Antioch, Taxila, and later Baghdad were waypoints in a dynamic web where the East met the West in continuous conversation. Every route presented unique challenges. High mountain passes often blocked the way with sudden snowfalls. Rivers flooded and shifted course. Sandstorms obscured the sun and wiped out entire caravans. But each danger was met with an equal dose of resilience. Merchants developed ingenious ways to navigate the terrain. Camels, aptly called the ships of the desert, were essential, with their wide feet and ability to go for days without water. Mountain ponies were bred for narrow passes, and even boats were used to transport goods along river valleys when needed. What makes the Silk Road so extraordinary is how it connected people not just geographically, but intellectually and spiritually. As travelers passed through different regions, they absorbed languages, styles, customs, and knowledge. Persian became a lingua franca in many regions. Greek ideas influenced Buddhist art. Chinese innovations like paper and the compass traveled westward, reshaping societies far beyond their origin. While the goods that moved along the Silk Road dazzled with their material beauty, it was the human encounters that truly made the road come alive. Nomads met scholars. Monks dined with warriors. Traders prayed in temples unfamiliar to their upbringing. The Silk Road was not just a channel for commerce, it was a bridge for understanding. The movement wasn't always peaceful. Raiders, rival empires, and natural disasters frequently disrupted the flow. Yet somehow, despite these interruptions, the network endured. It reshaped itself again and again, like a river after a storm. And in that adaptability lay its greatest strength. It wasn't the road that mattered, it was the people who walked it. Let us walk further still, into the markets and hearts of the Silk Road's busiest crossroads, where trade transformed not only wealth, but civilization itself. In the quiet of the early morning, when the stars had not yet faded from the sky, the markets of the Silk Road would begin to stir. Soft murmurs between traders, the clink of copper coins, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens. These were the sounds and scents of a world waking. And as the sun climbed higher, the pulse of trade began to beat stronger. Commerce was the lifeblood of the Silk Road. From the smallest village stalls to the great bazaars of Samarkand and Aleppo, goods changed hands in countless transactions, each one a thread in the fabric of a global economy long before the term even existed. The people who carried these goods, merchants, camel drivers, artisans, were not just economic agents. They were ambassadors of their cultures, navigators of perilous terrain, and storytellers by trade. Silk may have lent the route its name, but it was far from the only treasure that passed along its paths. From China came not only silk, but lacquerware, porcelain, gunpowder, and tea. India contributed spices, cotton, sugar, and precious stones. From the Middle East came glassware, incense, carpets, and richly dyed textiles. The Roman Empire offered gold, wine, olive oil, and finely crafted metalwork. Even Scandinavia, via the Volga trade route, sent furs and amber into the network. But these goods didn't simply travel from one end of the world to the other. They moved in stages, from hand to hand, region to region. A trader in Xi'an might sell silk to a Central Asian middleman, who in turn bartered it to a Persian merchant, who carried it to the ports of the Levant, where it would be shipped across the sea. At each stage, the price increased, the stories lengthened, and the legend of the East grew. Markets along the Silk Road were far more than places to buy and sell. They were hubs of life, centers of culture and conversation. In cities like Bukhara and Herat, the air was thick with the scent of spices, cardamom, saffron, turmeric, and alive with the sounds of musicians, poets, and street performers. Criers announced the day's specials, scribes recorded contracts, and cooks prepared dishes blending flavors from 3 continents. A single marketplace might host dozens of languages. Traders from Armenia negotiated with Sogdian caravaneers using a mix of Persian and Turkic. A Buddhist monk might find lodging at a Zoroastrian inn. An Arab scholar might be found purchasing scrolls in a Chinese-run bookstall. Multilingualism wasn't just a convenience, it was a necessity. The merchant class held a unique position in these cities. Though not always held in high regard by the elite of every empire, traders were among the few who regularly crossed borders and boundaries. They brought not only wealth, but foreign ideas, exotic goods, and new technologies. They also navigated legal systems, bribed corrupt officials, and sometimes employed guards or mercenaries to protect their caravans. Some became fabulously wealthy. Merchant houses in Baghdad, Venice, and Samarkand grew into financial empires, funding diplomatic missions and even influencing state decisions. Others made a humble living, trading salt for grain or wool for dates. Regardless of scale, each transaction was part of a larger cycle, linking farmer to weaver, miner to artisan, across vast and varied lands. Trade fairs became critical events. In some cities, such as Kashgar and Khotan, entire seasons were dedicated to hosting international traders. These gatherings were accompanied by feasts, games, and even temporary marriages between people of different tribes or regions. Trust, in such a wide and decentralized system, was often built on reputation and ritual. Over time, the infrastructure of trade developed. Weighing stations, customs posts, and standardized units of measurement helped reduce fraud. Currency became increasingly important, though barter still flourished where coins were scarce. Islamic finance introduced concepts like letters of credit, which allowed merchants to deposit funds in one city and retrieve them in another, a practice that laid the groundwork for modern banking. Trade also had its darker sides. Smuggling, piracy, and price manipulation were common. Taxes and tariffs fluctuated wildly depending on who controlled the roads. And where wealth flowed, so did exploitation. Not all goods traded were inanimate. Slavery, sadly, was a feature of many Silk Road economies. Human beings, like spices and jewels, were sometimes bought and sold. Yet despite these shadows, the Silk Road's markets shone brightly. They were crucibles of innovation, melting pots of diversity. Glass-blowing techniques from Syria influenced Chinese artisans. Indian dyes changed the colors of Persian textiles. Recipes traveled, evolved, and became local staples half a continent away. Even the concept of zero, born in India, made its way west through traders and scribes. In the simple exchange of goods for coin, something greater was happening. Worlds were meeting. People were listening. Empires were changing from within. The markets of the Silk Road were not just economic zones. They were the beating heart of a world slowly realizing its interconnectedness. And in that heart, there was rhythm, and there was life. Let us now walk further into the rich and intricate mosaic of belief and tradition that traveled this same path. For on the Silk Road, the trade of ideas was just as vital as the trade of goods. The journey across the Silk Road was not for the faint of heart. For every marketplace filled with wonder and every city that gleamed with gold, there were stretches of land so desolate, so vast, they seemed to stretch into eternity. The desert was both a passage and a trial, a crucible that tested patience, endurance, and the will to keep moving forward. Imagine a caravan at dawn, the sun barely touching the horizon, casting soft golden light on the backs of camels as they rise and stretch. Their breath forms small clouds in the chilly morning air. Traders and handlers wrap themselves in layers of cloth, adjusting saddlebags, tightening ropes, checking maps inked by hand and passed from guide to guide. A hush of anticipation blankets the group as they prepare to cross the wilderness. Central Asia, particularly the Taklamakan and Gobi, were among the most formidable obstacles on the Silk Road. The name Taklamakan, according to local legend, means you go in, but you don't come out. It was a place of shifting dunes, searing heat by day and icy winds by night. But to reach the fabled markets of the West, or to return home with foreign riches, travelers had no choice but to brave these harsh expanses. Caravans were carefully organized. A typical caravan might consist of dozens to hundreds of animals, camels, mules, and sometimes yaks, each one laden with goods tightly wrapped in cloth or animal hides. The lead camel wore bells, their gentle chime helping keep the caravan together amid the endless sands. Human guides and guards traveled alongside, some seasoned veterans of the route who could read the stars or detect hidden water sources buried beneath cracked soil. Camels were central to desert trade. Their wide, padded feet prevented them from sinking into the sand. They could survive for days without water and carry enormous loads, sometimes up to 600 pounds. Known for their patience and endurance, camels were more than beasts of burden. They were lifelines. Caravan masters treated them with respect and deep familiarity, often forming bonds with the animals over years of travel. Yet even the most experienced traveler faced danger. Sandstorms could rise without warning, blotting out the sun, scouring skin, and burying supplies. Entire caravans vanished in these storms, swallowed whole by the desert. Bandits also lurked along the routes, particularly near mountain passes and oases where ambushes could be laid. To guard against them, many caravans traveled in large groups or hired armed escorts. Some empires, recognizing the importance of safe trade, patrolled stretches of the route with soldiers, though these protections were inconsistent and often localized. The physical hardship was only one layer of the journey. The psychological weight could be immense. Days would pass without seeing a tree, a stream, or another soul. The world narrowed to the crunch of footsteps on sand, the creak of leather harnesses, the distant cry of a hawk. In these moments, solitude pressed in like the desert air itself, dry, endless, unyielding. But then, like a mirage made real, an oasis would appear. Places like Dunhuang, Turpan, and Merv were sanctuaries. Shaded by palms and sustained by underground water channels called kanats, these rest stops offered more than refreshment. They offered renewal. Here, caravans could rest for days, sometimes weeks. Animals were watered and fed, gear was repaired, and new trade deals were struck. News flowed through these stations like water itself. Updates on distant wars, rumors of new roads, stories of wealth, or warnings of danger ahead. Religious travelers often accompanied or joined caravans. Buddhist monks from China, Christian missionaries from the Roman world, Sufi mystics from Persia, all sought to spread their teachings or seek wisdom along the way. They brought not just beliefs, but texts, relics, and practices that would alter the spiritual fabric of the lands they passed through. In this way, the caravan became a vessel not only for trade, but for transformation. Food was basic and preserved. Dried meat, hard cheese, flatbread, and dried fruits were common staples. Traders carried fermented camel milk or grain-based alcohol for celebration or ritual. Meals were taken around campfires in the shelter of tents or behind low dunes, stories and songs shared under the stars. These quiet nights, moments of respite amid the grind, became cherished memories. Children were rare but not unheard of on the Silk Road. Some merchants brought their families on long expeditions, and it was not unusual for young boys to grow up learning the trade firsthand. Stories abound of children fluent in 3 or 4 languages by the time they reached adolescence, negotiators before adulthood. Caravan life created a culture of its own. Etiquette developed around sharing water, defending others from attack, and how to navigate disputes when languages failed. Even among strangers, a sense of brotherhood could form. In such extreme conditions, survival often depended on cooperation, and rivalries faded in the face of mutual need. Over centuries, the routes shifted. Some paths faded as cities fell. Others rose in importance as new political powers emerged. Yet through it all, the rhythm of the caravan endured. The slow, steady progress of movement across a vast and unforgiving world. And when finally a caravan arrived at its destination, whether a modest village or a great metropolis, it was met not just with excitement, but reverence. These travelers had faced the earth's fiercest landscapes and returned bearing the rarest treasures. They were the arteries of the Silk Road, pumping life from end to end. Let us now explore one of the greatest results of these epic journeys, the extraordinary blending of cultures and traditions. For while trade enriched pockets, cultural exchange enriched minds and hearts. Across the endless span of the Silk Road, in the shadow of mountains and at the edge of deserts, cities sprang up like jewels resting on a thread. These were more than mere waypoints. They were sanctuaries of civilization, places where water flowed, cultures mingled, and ideas took root. They were the soul of the Silk Road. Imagine walking through the arched gates of Samarkand as the late afternoon sun casts golden light on its blue tiled domes. Minarets rise like sentinels over the bustling streets. Merchants shout greetings in 6 languages. Children chase each other between vendors selling saffron, lapis lazuli, and silks dyed in hues of crimson and indigo. The air smells of roasted lamb, incense, and open earth. This is not just a market. It is a living mosaic, the meeting point of East and West. Samarkand was one of the crown jewels of the Silk Road. Located in modern-day Uzbekistan, it had stood for centuries before the Silk Road took shape, but its true flowering came during the height of the trade network. The city's strategic position made it a key resting place and trading hub for caravans crossing Central Asia. Its wealth attracted architects, scholars, and mystics, creating a city as rich in knowledge as it was in gold. The same could be said of Bukhara, another oasis city, whose history stretches deep into antiquity. Known for its mosques and madrasas, Bukhara was a place where the pursuit of knowledge was revered. Islamic theology, astronomy, and medicine flourished here. Caravanserais lined its edges, welcoming travelers from every point on the compass. It was said that a person could walk the streets of Bukhara and hear Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Chinese, and even Greek spoken freely in open-air tea houses. To the east, Kashgar was the gateway between China and Central Asia. Nestled at the crossroads of the northern and southern Silk Road routes, it lay in the shadow of the Pamir Mountains, where merchants either crossed or converged depending on their direction. At its sprawling market, still in operation in some form today, traders sold livestock, jade, silk, and musical instruments. From Kashgar, travelers could either press into the desert or ascend into the mountains, but nearly all who passed this way found in it a center of exchange and respite. Further west, cities like Merv in present-day Turkmenistan and later Baghdad in Iraq carried forward this urban tradition. Merv was once one of the largest cities in the world, a center for Zoroastrian learning and later Islamic scholarship. Baghdad, founded during the Islamic Golden Age, became not only a center for trade but for culture. It housed the House of Wisdom, where texts from Greece, India, and Persia were translated and preserved. These cities thrived not only because of their strategic locations, but because of the systems they built to support the flow of people and goods. Qanats, underground aqueducts, brought water from distant mountains into the heart of arid landscapes. Caravanserais offered food, shelter, and news. Public baths, libraries, and gardens made life not only survivable, but beautiful. Architecture along the Silk Road reflected this diversity of influence. Domes inspired by Persian traditions sat atop Buddhist-style courtyards. Columns with Greek motifs supported Central Asian buildings. Chinese dragons curled across the walls of Islamic palaces. These were not mere imitations, but adaptations, creative fusions that showed how ideas traveled just as surely as spices and cloth. Art flourished in these urban centers. Pottery painted in cobalt blues and emerald greens, textiles woven with golden thread, manuscripts illuminated with intricate calligraphy. All spoke to the interweaving of aesthetic traditions. In some cities, musicians gathered in courtyards to perform on instruments whose origins spanned continents. The oud from the Middle East, the pipa from China, the tabla from India. The music of the Silk Road was itself a conversation, each note a dialect of shared humanity. Religious life in these cities was equally varied. A single neighborhood might host a Buddhist temple, a Zoroastrian fire altar, a Christian church, and an Islamic mosque. Pilgrims and scholars crossed paths in the streets, and debates on philosophy or cosmology were as likely to be heard as haggling over rugs. Though tensions did exist, there was often a pragmatic tolerance, a recognition that diversity was not a threat, but a strength, and that the road belonged to all who walked it. What made these cities truly remarkable was their resilience. Time and again, they were struck by invasions, fires, droughts, or shifting political winds. And yet, they rose again, rebuilt by the hands of those who understood their value. Their walls may have crumbled, but their names endured, echoes of the Silk Road's heartbeat. Today, remnants of these cities still stand. Some have been preserved, others lie in ruins, half buried beneath centuries of dust. But to walk their streets, or what remains of them, is to feel something deeper than history. It is to sense the footsteps of countless travelers, the weight of goods traded, and the whispers of languages long since quieted. It is to know that these places were not only centers of commerce, but crucibles of civilization. The cities of the Silk Road were more than stops along a trade route. They were bridges between cultures, between eras, between the seen and the unseen. And as we move forward in our journey, we carry with us the legacy of their splendor and the knowledge that where people gather to exchange goods, they also exchange parts of themselves. Next, we turn to the ideas, beliefs, and stories that traveled this vast network, not as cargo, but as seeds of cultural transformation. The Silk Road was never merely about the trade of silk or the transport of spices. Woven into its fabric were stories, philosophies, and beliefs, ideas as precious as any gemstone, carried across deserts and mountains on the lips of pilgrims, scholars, artists, and adventurers. The caravans may have brought goods, but they also carried something more enduring, the human longing to understand, to share, to grow. Step into a quiet monastery nestled along a high mountain path in western China. The sun filters in through the carved wooden windows, casting golden light upon painted murals that tell stories of the Buddha's life, not in the traditional Indian style, but influenced by Greek artistic forms. Here, in the region of Dunhuang, Buddhist monks welcome travelers from across Asia, offering them shelter, spiritual counsel, and access to ancient texts. These sacred places became hubs for translation, conversation, and contemplation. Buddhism itself was one of the Silk Road's most profound travelers. It moved northward from India into Central Asia and China, carried not by force, but by curiosity and personal conviction. Along the route, the teachings of the Buddha took on new forms. In Gandhara, Buddhist art was infused with Greco-Roman aesthetics, robes draped like togas, serene faces chiseled with Western features. In China, Buddhism merged with Taoist and Confucian ideas, creating unique branches like Chan, which would later become Zen in Japan. The exchange was not one way. Chinese inventions like papermaking found their way westward, revolutionizing how knowledge was recorded and shared. The simple sheet of paper, lighter than parchment and easier to produce, would enable the translation of texts, the copying of manuscripts, and the broadening of literacy throughout the Islamic world and into Europe. Islam, too, traveled along these paths. Arab merchants and Persian scholars brought not only goods, but the teachings of the Quran. In the cities of Central Asia, Islamic architecture and scholarship flourished. Mosques with intricate mosaics and geometric patterns stood beside Buddhist stupas, often in quiet coexistence. Sufi mystics journeyed east, finding common ground with local spiritual traditions. They spoke of unity, divine love, and the music of the soul, ideas that resonated across borders. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Judaism, Manichaeism, all found space along the Silk Road. Each faith adapted to its surroundings, translating its texts into new languages, shaping its rituals to fit different contexts. The result was a spiritual tapestry, complex and intertwined. A merchant might begin his journey with Buddhist blessings, pray in a Christian church along the way, and offer thanks at an Islamic mosque at journey's end. Languages danced together in markets and courts. Sogdian became the lingua franca of trade, allowing communication across great linguistic divides. Greek, Sanskrit, Arabic, Chinese, and dozens of local dialects blended, influencing everything from poetry to law. With every spoken word, another thread of connection was spun. The arts flourished in this exchange. Musicians traveled with their instruments, performing for rulers and commoners alike. The haunting melodies of the Chinese guqin mingled with the rhythmic beats of Persian drums. Paintings, textiles, and jewelry reflected a melding of motifs, Chinese dragons coiled beside Persian peacocks. Indian lotuses bloomed in Byzantine mosaics. Scientific and medical knowledge flowed freely. Chinese alchemists exchanged notes with Arab astronomers. Indian mathematicians introduced the concept of zero, which transformed the way people calculated and thought about the universe. Persian polymaths translated ancient Greek texts, preserving and expanding on them, and these would later inform the European Renaissance. Medicine evolved as herbs from one region were matched with techniques from another, giving rise to practices still in use today. Philosophical ideas, too, journeyed on camelback. Confucian ideals of social harmony found unexpected dialogue with Stoic Roman philosophy. The Taoist concept of balance echoed in Indian Ayurvedic medicine and Sufi poetry. Through conversation, debate, and translation, the people of the Silk Road forged a shared intellectual heritage that transcended any single culture. In this way, the Silk Road was not only a trade route, it was a classroom, a temple, a gallery, and a library. It was a living museum of human thought and expression. It showed that ideas, once shared, do not shrink. They expand, they evolve, and they leave their mark on hearts and minds far from where they were born. In the soft glow of an oil lamp, somewhere in a caravanserai, imagine a young student listening to a storyteller recite the tales of Gilgamesh. Nearby, a Buddhist monk chants a sutra, while a Persian healer prepares an herbal remedy. The fire crackles. Outside, the desert wind howls. But here, in this quiet moment, the world is united, not by conquest, but by conversation. We now turn our attention to the ground beneath their feet, to the secrets still buried beneath sand and stone. For while many of these stories were told and retold, others waited silently, preserved for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. The Silk Road was a corridor not only for trade and belief, but for beauty, a realm where brush met chisel, thread met loom, and vision met inspiration. Along its winding length, artistry bloomed in forms both grand and humble, drawing from the full palette of human expression. Art and architecture, like goods and ideas, flowed freely between civilizations. From the temples of India to the palaces of Persia, from the murals of China to the mosaics of Byzantium, influences crossed borders and transformed as they went. What began in one corner of the world might appear subtly changed in another, an echo of a culture reborn in a new land. Imagine stepping into a Buddhist cave temple in Dunhuang, carved into cliffs overlooking the desert. On the stone walls, ancient artists painted vibrant scenes from the Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's past lives. But look closer, and you'll see something unusual. A Greek-style border framing the scene, the garments draped in Greco-Roman folds, the faces bearing features reminiscent of Western sculpture. This was no accident. It was the result of a centuries-long dialogue between East and West, carried not by conquest, but by caravans. In the region of Gandhara, modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, this synthesis was especially pronounced. As Buddhism traveled from India northward, it encountered the artistic heritage left behind by Alexander the Great's successors. The result was stunning. Buddha statues with wavy hair and Hellenistic expressions, seated in poses drawn from Greek sculpture. These images would later influence Buddhist art across East Asia, showing how deeply entwined cultural aesthetics could become. Persian art, too, found its way east. The delicate floral motifs and intricate arabesques that characterized Islamic manuscript illustration began to appear in Chinese textiles and ceramics. In return, Chinese artisans taught the world the secrets of porcelain, a medium that fascinated Europe and the Middle East alike. Chinese blue and white ware, in particular, became a global obsession, its motifs appearing in everything from Ottoman tiles to Dutch Delft pottery. Architecture told a similar story. The Silk Road cities became laboratories of architectural experimentation. Mosques with minarets inspired by Zoroastrian towers rose beside pagodas with tiered roofs. In Samarkand, the Registan Square emerged as a dazzling complex of Islamic madrasas, their facades adorned with glazed tiles in colours that mirrored the turquoise lakes of Tibet and the gardens of Persia. Even the very layout of cities shifted. Central Asian caravanserais borrowed designs from Roman villas and Persian gardens. Chinese city walls absorbed defensive techniques developed on the steppe. Domes became more frequent in Central Asia after contact with Byzantine and Persian engineers. And across it all, symbols repeated themselves. Lotus flowers, winged griffins, cloud motifs, translated across mediums and belief systems. Silk, the namesake of the route, was not only a commodity, but a canvas. Woven into bolts of cloth were stories, prayers, and emblems. A single garment might bear influences from half a dozen cultures. The robes of Tang dynasty elites, for instance, often featured Sogdian dances and Persian hunting scenes. In turn, Sogdian merchants decorated their homes with Chinese phoenixes and Buddhist deities. Jewelry, metalwork, and glassware travelled along similar routes. A Roman glass cup might find its way into a Chinese tomb. An Indian gemstone might be set in a Byzantine crown. Goldsmiths in Bactria fashioned pendants that blended steppe nomad styles with Greek elegance. Patterns became itinerant travellers, engraved on rings, embroidered in dresses, etched into temple walls. Music, too, was part of this exchange. Instruments moved freely across the road. The Chinese erhu has roots in Central Asia. The oud, a forerunner of the European lute, came from the Arab world and may have travelled eastward. Court musicians in Tang-era China often performed with instruments from Persia and India, creating compositions that blended rhythm, melody, and style from far-flung origins. The Silk Road's impact on art wasn't merely decorative. It reflected the deep engagement of cultures seeking to understand one another. In this convergence, artisans became storytellers of their time, bearing witness to a world more connected than many realized. Through their hands, the past was preserved and the future imagined. And yet, for all its splendor, much of this legacy lay hidden for centuries. Sand and time buried walls and canvases. Paint peeled, statues crumbled, cities vanished into dust. But the art remained, waiting to be rediscovered, to tell its story anew. As we move forward, let us now dig into the very earth beneath these roads and unearth the treasures, literal and metaphorical, that have been revealed by archaeologists and historians. For beneath the sand lies memory, and in memory, truth. Beneath the steady march of camels and the quiet exchanges of silk and song, another force shaped the Silk Road, the empires. Across vast territories and over centuries, mighty powers rose to oversee, protect, and often compete for the riches and prestige that flowed through this sprawling trade network. These empires did not merely tolerate the Silk Road. They depended on it, manipulated it, and sometimes fought over it. Each empire left its imprint on the path. Their armies paved it, their laws governed it, their ambitions extended it, and in return, the Silk Road brought them knowledge, wealth, and influence far beyond their borders. In the East, the Han Dynasty of China was among the earliest to recognize the road's potential. Their support for exploration and their military campaigns to secure routes through Central Asia laid the foundation for the trade network's growth. The construction of the Great Wall was not just a defensive barrier, it protected vital trade arteries and ensured safer passage for caravans entering and exiting the empire. Han officials worked to establish diplomatic and commercial ties with distant kingdoms, encouraging stability in the regions along the road. Further west, the Parthian Empire, located in present-day Iran, controlled vast lands critical to the Silk Road's middle segment. The Parthians became master middlemen, skilled in managing east-west trade and ensuring that goods from China reached the Roman world. They prospered from tolls and taxes, and their cosmopolitan courts became melting pots of languages, religions, and artistic styles. Their cities, like Ctesiphon, gleamed with both Persian and Hellenistic influences. The Roman Empire, situated at the Silk Road's westernmost fringe, developed a powerful appetite for luxury goods, especially silk. Roman senators and aristocrats paid staggering sums for Chinese textiles, fueling a trade imbalance that concerned even emperors. Yet, despite the demand, few Romans knew the true origin of the silk they craved. Chinese merchants rarely ventured so far west, and Roman traders seldom reached China. Instead, a series of intermediaries carried goods from one empire to the next, across thousands of miles and dozens of borders. During the 7th and 8th centuries, a new empire emerged that would radically reshape the Silk Road, the Islamic Caliphate. Spanning from Spain in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, the Umayyad and later Abbasid caliphates brought a new era of cultural and economic unity to much of the route. Arabic became a lingua franca. Islamic law and infrastructure, roads, rest houses, and administrative systems provided stability and security for merchants. Baghdad, founded in 762 CE, became a nexus of knowledge and trade, drawing scholars and traders from every corner of the known world. But perhaps no empire embraced the Silk Road more completely than the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongols united a vast stretch of Eurasia under a single political authority, the largest contiguous land empire in history. With an iron grip and surprising administrative sophistication, the Mongols implemented a postal system, issued passports, paisi, and established military patrols to protect merchants. The resulting peace and order, known as the Pax Mongolica, ushered in a golden age for the Silk Road. Never before had so many routes been so secure. Trade flourished, cities expanded, and knowledge flowed freely between East and West. The Mongols welcomed foreign envoys and travelers, including the Venetian merchant Marco Polo, whose accounts of his journey to the court of Kublai Khan captivated Europe and revealed the grandeur of the East. Yet empires are not eternal. As each declined or fractured, so too did the sections of the Silk Road they had protected. The fall of the Western Roman Empire disrupted Mediterranean trade. The rise of maritime powers in the Indian Ocean diverted traffic from overland routes. Internal strife in China or Persia often made travel perilous, and new empires, when they rose, brought new laws, new alliances, and new priorities. Still, the legacy of these empires remains etched in the very geography of the Silk Road. Fortresses and watchtowers dot the landscape, their stones silent witnesses to centuries of power. Roads built by soldiers now echo with tourist footsteps. Old trade routes have become highways, while ancient caravanserais host travelers once more, though now they carry cameras instead of spices. What the empires of the Silk Road understood, in their best moments, was that power and prosperity were not only about conquest or control. They were about connection. Each empire, in fostering the flow of goods and ideas, carved out a place in the shared story of humanity. Their influence reached far beyond their borders, not just in gold or soldiers, but in the language, culture, and memory that still shape our world. As we continue, we will now turn our attention to the archaeologists, historians, and dreamers who have unearthed these stories. Beneath the dust of centuries, the Silk Road speaks still, through ruins, relics, and the enduring spirit of discovery. For centuries, the Silk Road seemed to fade into the background of history, like an ancient melody that had once echoed across the earth, but had fallen silent. Desert sands and time had swallowed its cities, its caravanserais, its trails worn into oblivion by wind and neglect. Yet the road was not gone, only hidden. Beneath the dust, beneath layers of earth and story, it waited. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a new kind of traveller arrived along the ancient routes. Not merchants, not pilgrims, but archaeologists. These modern adventurers sought not trade, but truth. Armed with maps, shovels, and curiosity, they traced the contours of forgotten civilizations, uncovering what time had concealed. One of the earliest and most significant discoveries came from the region of Dunhuang, a desert outpost on the edge of the Gobi Desert. Behind its windswept cliffs lay the Mogao Caves, a network of nearly 500 grottos filled with murals, sculptures, and sacred texts. For over 1,000 years, monks and artists had labored there, preserving the teachings of the Buddha in stone and paint. When the British-Hungarian explorer Aurel Stein arrived in 1907, he found a sealed cave containing thousands of manuscripts and relics, a time capsule of the Silk Road's spiritual and intellectual life. Stein's discovery sent shockwaves through the scholarly world. Among the artifacts were texts written in Chinese, Sanskrit, Tibetan, Sogdian, and more. Proof of the cultural and linguistic melting pot that the Silk Road had been. There were administrative records, folk tales, sutras, and letters, some from merchants assuring loved ones of safe passage, others from monks documenting temple life. Other expeditions followed. German, Russian, Japanese, and French teams raced to excavate sites along the route. In the Tarim Basin, they uncovered mummies remarkably well preserved by the dry climate. The so-called Tarim mummies, tall, red-haired, and dressed in woven woolens, challenged assumptions about ancient migration and cultural exchange. Their presence in the heart of Asia hinted at long-forgotten connections between Europe and the East. In Afghanistan, at a site called Ai-Khanum, French archaeologists unearthed a city that bore unmistakable Greek characteristics: columns, theatres, and inscriptions in Greek script. Here was a Hellenistic city, founded in the wake of Alexander the Great's conquests, that had flourished at a Silk Road crossroads. Its architecture and artifacts told a story of fusion, where Greek thought met Buddhist practice and Central Asian tradition. In Iran, the ruins of Ctesiphon and Persepolis revealed layers of imperial ambition and artistry. In Samarkand, layers of walls and palaces pointed to waves of conquerors, each adding their own chapter to the city's rich narrative. In China, the ancient city of Chang'an yielded glimpses into a metropolis teeming with foreign traders, diplomats, and goods from across the known world. These discoveries were not just physical, they were emotional. They awakened a collective memory, a sense of shared human heritage. They reminded modern nations that their histories were interwoven, that no culture was ever truly isolated. Museums around the world now hold treasures from the Silk Road, fragments of tapestries, pottery, scrolls, coins, and figurines. Some of these finds remain subjects of debate, especially as countries seek the return of cultural artifacts taken during colonial times. Yet, even amid the controversy, the importance of these pieces remains clear. They are echoes of voices long past, and the search continues. With modern technology, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, 3D modeling, new discoveries are made each year. Desert sands still shift to reveal ancient roads. Mountain valleys still harbor secrets in their soil. And every find adds a new thread to the Silk Road's tapestry. But the Silk Road was never just physical. It was an idea, a belief in connection, in curiosity, in crossing boundaries. The archaeologists and historians who revive its memory are not just uncovering ruins. They are rekindling a spirit, a reminder that long before modern globalization, people were already reaching out to one another, trading not just goods, but dreams. Now, as we approach the end of our journey, let us turn our gaze forward. What is the legacy of the Silk Road today? How do its paths, though no longer bustling with caravans, continue to shape the world we live in? The caravans no longer cross the deserts as they once did. The dusty hooves of camels and the long shadows of pack trains have faded into memory. Yet in many ways, the Silk Road has never truly disappeared. Its essence endures, not only in artifacts or ruins, but in the rhythms of our modern world, in the ideas that pass between people, and in the choices that nations make today. Trade routes may have transformed, and cities may have risen where none stood before, but the drive to connect, the fundamental spirit that birthed the Silk Road, remains very much alive. Today's Silk Roads are paved with railways, shipping lanes, fiber optic cables, and digital networks. Cargo now moves in containers rather than on camelback, and information travels at the speed of light, not the pace of a caravan. But the purpose is the same: exchange, collaboration, and discovery. In the 21st century, China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, aims to revive the glory of the ancient network through modern infrastructure and global investment. High-speed railways now stretch from Xi'an to Europe. Roads, ports, and economic corridors connect dozens of countries in Asia, Africa, and Europe. While the BRI is ambitious and controversial, politically and economically, it echoes the timeless desire to link distant regions, to share resources, and to deepen interdependence. It is a contemporary reflection of what the Silk Road once embodied. Yet the modern Silk Road extends far beyond commerce and infrastructure. It finds its voice in diplomacy and cultural exchange, in music festivals that bring together artists from across Central Asia, in student exchange programs that immerse young minds in distant languages, and in the digitization of ancient manuscripts that are made accessible to anyone with an internet connection. It lives in the threads of a Kashmiri shawl sold in a Paris boutique, in the saffron used in a Tokyo kitchen, and in the storytelling traditions passed down from one generation to the next in towns that once welcomed caravans. Technology has also reshaped the meaning of the Silk Road. E-commerce platforms allow artisans from Uzbekistan to sell hand-woven carpets to buyers in Toronto. Virtual museums host exhibits of ancient Silk Road treasures, visited by people who may never set foot on the steps. Online classrooms teach Persian poetry to Chinese students and Confucian ethics to young scholars in Spain. In this digital renaissance, knowledge and creativity once again travel freely across borders. Tourism plays a role too, breathing life into long-forgotten cities. Travelers walk the streets of Bukhara, stand before the Registan in Samarkand, or explore the cave temples of Dunhuang. Governments are investing in preservation, restoring mosaics, repairing caravanserais, and interpreting ruins for a global audience. Each journey made by today's traveller echoes the steps of ancient pilgrims and merchants, continuing a dialogue that stretches across time. Academic research into Silk Road history has flourished. Multidisciplinary teams of archaeologists, linguists, and historians work together to piece together forgotten chapters. Universities hold conferences exploring how the Silk Road shaped global religion, cuisine, medicine, and diplomacy. Advanced technologies, digital mapping, and AI-driven translation tools are unlocking insights from buried cities and undeciphered texts, illuminating the past in unprecedented ways. The spirit of the Silk Road also lives in the conversations we have, in the meals we share, in the stories we tell one another. In every instance where two cultures meet, on the page, across a table, through a screen, we are participating in a legacy thousands of years in the making. It is a reminder that understanding and empathy grow not through separation, but through contact. Yet, the lessons of the Silk Road are not only celebratory, they are also cautionary, for the same roots that brought connection also carried conflict. Alongside silk and spices came diseases and disputes. Power struggles over trade routes led to wars, and the very interconnectedness that fostered prosperity could also spread instability. In our world today, globalized, fast-moving, interwoven, we must remember the balance the Silk Road taught. That connection must be tempered with respect, and that rapid movement of ideas and goods should be accompanied by deep understanding. The Silk Road's legacy, then, is not just a celebration of what was, but a guide for what could be. In a time where division often dominates headlines, the example of the Silk Road encourages us to look beyond borders, to embrace curiosity, and to seek unity in diversity. It calls on us to be modern travelers, not always in body, but in spirit, to engage with others, to learn their stories, and to find beauty in difference. As we move deeper into the 21st century, the Silk Road endures, not just as history, but as metaphor, as aspiration. In every conversation, every shared innovation, every act of generosity that bridges cultures, it comes alive again. We have walked in the footsteps of merchants and monks, soldiers and scholars, across valleys and deserts, through mountain passes and sacred cities. We have stood beneath the dazzling blue domes of Samarkand, heard the bells of distant caravan trains, and marveled at the way silk once shimmered like captured moonlight in the hands of a trader from a far-off land. We have imagined the weight of coins exchanged, the feel of parchment scrolls, and the laughter of children growing up at the edges of empire. We have seen how the Silk Road was never just a single route, but a living, breathing network, a vast and shifting web that stretched across continents and cultures. It was a mirror of the human spirit, a corridor of connection where not only goods but dreams, ideas, and destinies were carried across the earth. It linked not just East and West, but hearts and minds, languages and legacies. This road was paved not only with stones and sand, but with courage, the kind shown by those who ventured beyond the familiar, guided only by the stars and their instinct. With determination, they crossed snow-laden passes, faced fierce winds, and endured countless unknowns, all in pursuit of something more, of knowledge, of trade, of kinship, of wonder. It was also a road of resilience. Time and time again, the Silk Road was fractured by war, disrupted by nature, or diverted by politics. Yet always it adapted, realigned, and returned. reborn in the footsteps of those who believed in its purpose. Protected by empires, fueled by ambition, and preserved by storytellers, it carried on. And now, even as the old trails have grown faint beneath the sands of centuries, the Silk Road has not vanished. It remains with us, in memory, in movement, in metaphor. It survives in the preserved scrolls and ancient ruins, but also in our cities, our museums, our markets. It lives on in our languages, our cuisines, our customs, and in the connections we continue to make today, across continents and cultures, in moments small and grand. As we look forward, we also look back. We honor the travelers of old whose names have been lost, but whose legacies endure in every act of curiosity and courage. In a world still discovering its shared story, their journey reminds us of the value of exchange, not just of trade, but of trust, not just of culture, but of compassion. Thank you for coming on this journey with me tonight. I truly hope you go on to have a wonderful night's sleep and restful dreams. If you enjoyed this story, I'd appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and maybe even comment on other places you would like to visit, and I'll try and make it happen. But for now, settle down, relax, close your eyes, and drift off. May sound sleep and beautiful dreams come to you tonight. You deserve it.